All right. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome once again to the Nephesh Podcast. This is episode 56, and I am so thrilled and honored to have friends of mine who I've known for a long, long time on the podcast here, Rod and Kristen Gomez. Who, again, I've known for like a couple decades. That's a little scary. Rod, you were in my first youth group. There are so many blackmail stories that you could share. I mean, I guess it goes both ways, right? I know
It sure does.
you, and you know stuff about me that probably wouldn't want people to know. But it's just awesome to see where you, and then of course we've got Kristen there, and she is there with a couple of the kids. So Kristen, just pop on and say hi.
Hello, everyone.
And then Tabitha, I don't know if Tabitha, she's eating something, so I don't know if she wants to say hi.
Say hi.
Nope, she's eating. All right.
She's not having it.
But so excited to have you on, Rod, and to share your story. You know, I've seen kind of from a macro as well as a micro view of your life, and watched as the Lord has just brought you through so much to where you are. You're in Texas now, in I actually don't know where you are. You're somewhere in Texas. I was about to
North
throw
Texas
some names, Frisco or
that's about right.
All right, you know,
approximate.
So many Californians are moving to Texas. I think Texas is about ready to send them back. I don't know. Are they?
I think you're welcoming? Right. They've been super welcoming, except for the one gal at the DMV. She said, "Oh no, not another Californian."
Did she really?
To my face. At which point I threw my California driver's license at her and I said, "Take it. I'm here now.
You will take this. That's am right. Here." That is funny. So you guys are now in around Dallas, Texas, and you are church planting there with another colleague and pastor. And so it's exciting again to see your journey, knowing where you've been, where you've come from, and just seeing, you know, as I've known you, seeing your potential, always seeing what you could do. From president of the United States, actually probably nobody wants that job now, but
no thanks.
Like you could have been and done anything, and to see where the Lord has brought you is just so cool. So you're going to share your soul story, and I want you to take us back to growing up. What was that like? Were you born in Norwalk, California?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Sandy Joe. It's been such a privilege to know you, and just to see even some of the macro of your life as well, to be excited and to be encouraged by that. You've made such a profound difference in my life, and I'm sure I'll have a lot to say about that when we get to that point of the story, but thank you very much. I'm honored, and I'm stoked to share some of my soul story with you. But it does begin in the Norwalk area. La Mirada is where I was born, but Norwalk is where I have most of my development as a young man. I was born to a 17-year-old girl and a 19-year-old, I hesitate to call him a man, but another young person.
I didn't realize your parents were that young when they had you.
It registered with me, I don't know, sometime in my early to maybe my mid-teens, when I thought, man, my parents were my age just about when they had me. And what I later found out is that they actually they had a sibling before me that didn't make it. So I was not the first, but I was the first that made it out. And
what was did the baby just not survive? Was it stillborn, or do you know the details?
I do. Well, I know a little bit. I know it's tough for them to talk about it, but if I'm understanding the signals right, and I think I am, they elected not to have the baby at a certain point in the pregnancy, long enough to know gender, and I'm not sure who exactly was behind it. But it was a decision that they made.
Wow. How does that, I don't know, how does that resonate with you?
That's heavy. It's heavy. And I think one of the things that really stands out to me, I mean, there's so many parts of my life that I can look and see the deliberate act of God just protecting and preserving me. and I don't have to be here. I could have not been here, obviously.
Right.
So I am profoundly influenced by the preciousness of my life, and
Wow.
I don't take it for granted. I'm so thankful to have a life, and I have vowed to the Lord not to waste it. So
Mm.
I'm thankful for that. As heavy as it was to hear that and to
Yeah.
understand what that means and all that had gone on in my family, it gave
Yeah.
me profound respect for life and gratitude toward
Mm.
God for the life that I have.
Well, and fast forward, you've had 5 kids, so you really respect life.
It's funny because some of them, they just kind of happened. It's not like we were unclear about how that typically happens, but we were
You
surprised
were aware
ourselves.
of the whole process and how it works. So
The
some of that
public
was
school
cleared.
system didn't fail me in that regard. So I knew that much. But yeah,
Oh,
we ended up having more kids because we love having a larger
yes.
family, and granted, we're nowhere near your
Yes.
family size, but we're thankful
Well,
for it.
but both of you, I mean, Krista, you just have a sister, and then Rod, you have your brother. And so do you have stepbrothers and sisters, Rod?
I have two stepbrothers. Um, Let me think here. And then I have multiple brothers who are, um, well, okay, I have two half brothers, two stepbrothers, and I think there's more out there that I'm just not aware of on my
Oh my
dad's side.
goodness. I don't know if I knew that. Wow. Okay. But essentially you grew up within that nucleus of just your younger brother, right? And then of course,
Right.
Kristen, you had your younger sister. And so the idea of having a bigger family and kind of maybe creating something that you didn't necessarily have growing up with some of the challenges that were there. So your parents were really young when they had you, and then there's a whole age gap between you and your younger brother, right?
Yeah, my younger brothers, guys got 4 or 5 years of youth on me.
Okay.
We were, yeah, it was just the two of us primarily, me and my brother Philip. He and I were close after I left the house, but growing up in that family, I didn't think eventually I would have a larger family. It was more of a
Mm,
decision in my adulthood of like, no, this is good. It makes sense. And I think we can do good to others by this sounds so self-serving. I think we could do good by having a large family. That was
sure,
kind of the impetus behind it.
sure. So were both of your parents present for your growing up time? Were both your mom and dad in the home?
Um, Off and on, and it's kind of a tumultuous story. So my mom, being a young lady, she took up a lot of jobs, and as often is the case in families like this, the woman will bear much of the burden
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that the family stays together. And so my mom did a very commendable job for how old she was and what she knew. She was a hard worker. My
Sure.
dad, for a season, really did try his best to be the breadwinner. He was deeply flawed, and I think still has a lot of issues that he wrestles with that have been
Mm,
inflicted on him from his own youth.
right.
When I look back at their own childhood, my mom had, I mean, she has abuse in her family of all
Wow.
forms and sizes,
Wow.
and her personally. My dad has very similar, emotional, physical abuse in different forms and fashions on his side.
Wow.
I look at my family and think, wow, you guys did a really good job, all things considered.
Right.
Doesn't mean it was good. It doesn't
Right.
mean that I look back and I look and see, man, I had a Pollyanna kind of life. It
Right.
was anything but.
Right.
So my dad, he wrestled with his own demons, and that meant for
Mm,
him, he was in and out of prison quite a bit. And
wow.
for a few of those seasons, I remember for all of my high school years, I think, I don't know that he was ever out of prison, and
Mm,
I never visited him. He
wow.
would send me letters, but I rarely talked to him. I didn't respond to them, and that
Why?
plays kind of a substantial role in some of my development too. I grew very embittered toward both my parents, um,
Mm,
and for some of those reasons had to do with the fact that they seemed oblivious for how to raise somebody, how to love
yeah.
somebody. And again, now I know, looking back,
Sure.
what happened and what was behind that. But back then, I just didn't understand it. So I grew in a lot of bitterness and hatred toward them.
Well, as I mean, in childhood and as a teenager, it's understandable that you would develop that, right? And as we grow older and healthier and we deal with our own stuff and we deal with our childhood, whether it's trauma or just challenges, the mature, healthy part is to be able to grow and forgive and process through that. but it's understandable if you are experiencing neglect. And it sounds like that's at the minimum what it was. I mean, again, I kind of came into your life, I think, when you were 16, and I just, all that you were doing, all that you were involved in, it just felt like you were in a race to keep yourself busy, to make something of yourself. But it was all you. I mean, it was you taking care of you, getting a job, going to school, being involved in all the musicals, being involved at church. You were taking care of yourself, and you probably learned how to do that at a really early age. And so, and I kind of prefacing this for those who don't know the area. I don't know what Norwalk is like now. I haven't been in that area for many years, but I think at the time you were growing up, it was still not. I mean, there are parts of Norwalk that are still not so good,
Right.
and it's in
Right.
LA County, and there were some challenges even kind of growing up in that area. And I think it's not uncommon for there to be households where the mom is the primary either breadwinner or the only person in the house raising kids.
Right.
That was kind of what was going on in that era, and in that area. Now there was another layer in that your brother Philip, didn't he have a form of cancer?
Yeah, and that just adds even more interesting dynamics to the story, because my young brother, my only brother, uh, full biological brother, got this tumorous cancer in and about his stomach region. He'd often complain about his stomach hurting, and my parents thought, okay, well, he just doesn't want to eat the dinner, doesn't like the food, and so a few times they let him off the hook. But our family was pretty strict, and so they're like, no, you got to eat, and so they would essentially encourage him strongly, force him to eat, and he would try, and then he would just say, oh, my stomach hurts, my stomach hurts. So eventually they took him to the pediatrician. The pediatrician felt around and thought it warranted an MRI or some kind of scan of one sort or another. And they found out that he had this cancerous tumor in his belly that threatened his
Wow.
life. And so that began a series of tests, and I mean, years of chemo and radiation
Wow.
therapy.
How
Lost
old
his
was he?
hair. I struggle to know precisely the timing of his cancer, but I can't imagine him being older than
Wow.
5 or 6, somewhere in that region.
So you were around 9 or 10 at the time, and then it lasted for how long?
I, Again, the timing is hard. I struggle with understanding exactly what it looked like, but I'm guessing at least a few years. It
Wow.
was multiple years. I know that much because we had this
Wow.
event that we would go to for families of cancer,
Mm-hmm.
kids with cancer, and we
Right.
went to that event at least 3 or 4 times.
Wow.
So if that's a good marker, I would say it had to last several years, where
Wow.
he was always on the precipice of life and death. They weren't sure if he would make it
Wow.
out because he was so.
Really?
There were times where he was really sickly, just struggling, because I mean he's a
Wow.
little boy, and cancer and
Yeah.
chemo,
Right.
radiation, that really does a number on you. I
Right.
remember my mom changing his, he had tubes that were going into his body for different reasons and different seasons, and so
Mm.
she'd have to gauze him up and clean up the
Wow.
area. Yeah, it was a really difficult time for our family, but positively, because they, I don't know, I don't know how to describe this, because I think they were so hopeless. They did find hope in the church, or in the scriptures, in the Bible.
Mm.
Now, granted, it was Benny Hinn, and it was guys like that promised
Sure.
healing if there was sufficient faith. So I don't think that
Right.
was the helpful thing, but it did get them through the door.
Okay. So did you guys start going to church as a result of that? Is that how you found your way to church?
My mom was more apprehensive toward church, but my dad was more open to it. He had friends in prison that kind of, they befriended him, and they were
Mm.
Christians. And so that's actually our gateway to church. My dad
Okay.
found friends in prison who got us to a church in Paramount that was an Assemblies of God. My
Okay.
mom never went, but my dad would
Okay.
take my brother and I. And then that eventually led us to Cerritos First Assembly,
Right.
where we actually stayed plugged in for years after that.
Right. Wow. So what was it? So your dad was taking you to church, and the connection was friends in prison. Your mom never went, but you there was something there after a while that you kind of resonated with and continued to stay involved, at least from my perspective. When did you first encounter God? Is there a moment where you feel like you became aware of him or his presence, or something? Did something happen? Was there a type of event?
Yeah, I could tell you for sure, one of the primary things God used to awaken me to his reality was the people. The people were so kind, and I thought they were genuine people. And
Wow.
coming from my background, my parents, again, imperfect, broken themselves, they would have a lot of fights. They would yell at each other. There would be screaming, and my dad would lose his temper. He'd hit a wall. He never hit my mom or hit us.
But you
He
saw
spanked us.
the violence, the anger that would be expressed, even though it wasn't at a person. There were kind of violent acts.
Yes, I mean, and it went both ways. My mom was not inactive in those situations. I mean, they were both real. I mean, their youthfulness was evident. Again, looking
Sure.
back, I can now interpret those events more precisely. But
Sure.
in the moment, I'm just thinking, this is awful, but it's normal. This
Wow.
is the way life is. I didn't
Right.
realize that there was an alternative until I met the church, and
Mm.
people at the church were just warm and friendly and kind, and that began to open the door for me in a real way, that maybe there's something more to this. And when I got to Cerritos First Assembly, this is years later, people began to show me and my brother, because my father wasn't in the picture for most of that time. He went back to prison. They'd show my brother and I the kind of love and care and attention that I just had not known.
Wow.
And so when my dad stopped attending, he was our ride. He was our to and from,
Sure.
because my mom wasn't going.
Right.
We could have stopped attending if it were not for the fact that multiple people jumped in and said, "Oh, we'll pick you up. We'll take you.
Wow.
We'll pick you up and we'll drop you off." And
Wow.
that spoke volumes to me. It was so profoundly
Mm.
moving for me.
In a way, you were kind of adopted by the church. And you and I know you eventually went into youth ministry, and we probably both have seen that, where you've got the parents who are not involved, and the church or youth pastors step in and kind of create that family environment for these teenagers, and or for kids if they're children's pastors. um, and that really does help to connect these young people to God. And I think what you're describing is truly living out faith, right? And James talks about faith without works being dead, that people were actually, instead of just saying, "Hey, you need a ride to church," we'll pray that you get one, they're actually going and giving you a ride to church, right? So
Right.
I mean, you got pretty plugged in. I remember when I came, you were involved in Royal Rangers. You were like, everybody was talking about you as this golden child. This is the golden boy. Like, this is the guy who is so smart, so active. Like, he's going to be Royal Ranger of the Year or whatever it is in Royal Rangers. I don't remember what it is. And then I pretty quickly stole you away from that into youth ministry, which our Royal Ranger leaders did not appreciate. But I mean, you found a place there, I think, along with, I mean, you were pretty involved at that time in your high school with well, with everything, right? Musicals, and what was that? Something, and I think this is part of your personality, but at some point something kicked in where you just kind of, I mean, you just went for it. You got involved. You were a good student. You just put yourself really fully into school, into life. I remember that you were juggling a job, musical at school, youth stuff, and taking your brother to church and all of that kind of stuff. At what point did that, I don't know, did that kick in for you?
I'm kind of ashamed about this aspect of it, but part of what drove me, and now that you put it that way, I guess I never really put the pieces together in that way. In my mind, I was just kind of coping and
Yeah.
surviving and learning to figure things out.
Yeah.
But much of what drove me, again, going back to my relationship with my mom and dad, I I feel like I really hated them for a season.
Mm,
I had no respect for my dad.
wow.
Again, he would write me letters. I would not respond to them. I
Wow.
felt like he had not earned any of my reciprocation. My
Yeah.
mom, I mean, my mom and I were at each other's throats at
Yeah.
different seasons for different reasons. And so twice I was kicked out of my house
I
because of
remember
fights that
that.
she and I had.
Yeah.
So I was driven to succeed in order to spite them. And it's
Mm,
funny because ironically, I was in the church and I was trying my best to be a good Christian kid and to do things the
right.
way God wanted. And yet so much of
Right.
my heart was propelled by the anger of I'm going to
Mm,
prove that I don't need you. And I want
yeah.
to shove this dagger as deeply into your heart as I
Wow.
possibly can so that I can show you that you have been utterly
Wow.
meaningless in my life. It
Yeah.
was powerful. And it was enough to, I mean, I remember listening to music back in that day too, that would really stoke this kind of internal
Mm.
angstiness. And I know it's part of being a teenager,
That
right?
that emo music, right?
Yeah, part of it. That was really part of it. And there were so many more artists that I'd listened to that really helped, again, fuel that fire
Yeah.
of aggression. So part of it
Mm,
was that. And the other part of it is I know that if I'm going to succeed, I can't play it safe here. I have to get myself involved in a lot of things. I want
yeah.
to make myself marketable. I want to make myself someone attractive to potential employers and
Right.
schools.
Right.
So I wanted to succeed. And in my mind, success really meant just being academically, financially successful, independent, and those kinds of things.
You know that pain with your parents is it's really it's really important to understand and um and to kind of, I don't know, give you some grace. What you experienced growing up, the instability, the lack of really parents who are able to know how to care for you and love you. uh, anger anger is always a symptom of something else, right? And so the it sounds like there was just a lot of pain, and that turned into anger, then directed at your parents. But the positive is that it propelled you forward. Like, you didn't stay stuck and just kind of um, meander your way through life. You really took it. I just picture you at that time were just like nonstop. I don't even know if you slept. I just feel like you were constantly moving from one thing to the next, and attempting to again just kind of make something of yourself. And so I think that, is the positive. So you graduated high school, and then I know it took you a few years to be able to get into college. There were some challenges there, but you began to work and you got really, really involved in youth ministry as a youth leader, and then as the worship leader for the youth, and interned and all of that, and felt like there was a call to ministry. Maybe talk about that a little bit during those years.
Well, one of the things that really helped direct my heart, my mind, my soul was being part of the youth ministry. It was this deeper impact under your leadership. And I remember when I went to the youth ministry and kind of got invested in that, and you would take me out and make me read these books and talk to me about digging deeper. It was always about digging deeper. And
That's not the right
I,
answer, Rod. Keep digging, keep digging.
yes, yes, I
And
could
after a
hear
while, you were
that.
just coming up with answers. I was like, yeah, sure, that's it.
Oh man, I struggled so much with those questions. But I think that was one of there are moments in your life that are just so shaping, so influencing that they just, okay, I'm being directed elsewhere, and this feels right. This is good. It's kind of a groove that God sends you through. And I feel like deeper impact and all that happened in that, your training, your mentorship really helped shape the way that I understood my life, myself, and it
Wow.
helped me be aspirational for something better,
Yeah.
something different. I
Yeah.
think that's when the seeds of forgiveness had begun to be planted, and the
Mm,
seeds of maybe I don't need to carry this burden to actually
yeah.
propel myself in a different direction and propel
Right.
myself forward. So youth ministry was super fun. I enjoyed it. I
Mm,
loved it. I had such a great time. I built relationships with people that just felt amazing. I
yeah.
loved this season of my life, and it had such an impression upon me that I thought this would be really cool to do. But I never thought it would make sense for me to presume upon God and say, I'm going to be a youth pastor. I'm going to be in professional ministry. So I always kind of had the sense of like, yeah, I'd like to someday at some point when I'm a healthy person, when I have something to offer, God will put me there. So it was one of those things where I said, okay, I'd like to do that, Lord, but I'm not going to put myself into it. You're going to have to do it. So I began to just pursue getting education and trying to prepare myself for ministry in order to be ready if and when the opportunity ever arose. And that's kind of how I played my cards for the next several years. And I guess it worked in that I always kept an eye on it, but I never pursued it actively.
Well, you had, and still do, had such a hunger for growth and for learning. And it was something that I recognize because I see it in myself, right? And so kind of you were a mirror at times, that desire for growth, for learning, for bettering yourself. Again, similar to what I saw in me. But the hunger for you it was very, not visceral, there's another word, almost primal. And it was, again, I think there was something linked back to childhood, a desire to really pull yourself out and not maybe repeat patterns, repeat things of the past. But it was so awesome to see. And it's like you just, I don't know, like just a shower of everything, God, knowledge, learning, growth, leadership. It was just like you were just letting it wash over you in every possible way that you could. But I think it took you a few years to kind of to fully enter into that call to ministry. And I wonder, maybe you can speak to this a little bit more. Was there a part of you that wondered if you were worthy, good enough, and or because the calling of ministry for you took it, and still do, you take it very, very seriously. So was there a part of you that just doubted that, I don't know, that God would want to use you?
Man, Sandy Joe, you sometimes your finger on my pulse gets a little too scary at times. I wrestled with, I still wrestle with an inferiority complex. I don't know if I call it a complex, but it's certainly there.
Yeah.
I had such a high respect for you and for your role. And at the time when we were at Desert Rain for Pastor Don, I respected spiritual leadership. And for whatever reason, God just gave me I think a healthy respect of authorities.
Yeah.
And that turned in my mind into something like, man, I'm not there. I'm never going to be there. I don't have the pedigree. I don't have the training. There's so much I don't know. And I know that there's a million things I don't know.
Right.
So how would it make sense for me to do that unless and until I reach some magical stage of, I don't want to call, perfection, and not that, maybe wholeness or completeness. And even now I'm like, I'm not there. I know I'm not there, but God has dealt with me in such a way where I'm still dealing with this inferiority. And that's part of what drove me, I think, so much. I did not want it to be seen that I wasn't enough. I didn't want it to be seen that I was, this poor kid from a poor apartment home, with the dad that's in prison. I didn't want people to see that. Right. Because then I'd be exposed, and my exposure would leave me vulnerable to being rejected, and my rejection would mean my destruction. So there was so much that fed into that. And to be quite frank, I still deal with this in a lot of ways. But by God's grace, I'm making progress, but certainly, man, I am not there.
Well, and I appreciate that honesty and vulnerability, because the truth is everybody is there and everybody struggles with that. And we're just not as, I think the reality of everybody's level of insecurity, there is a certain amount of kind of confidence and esteem that it takes for us to survive each day. And if we don't feel it, we try to manufacture it, right? Fake it until you make it. But the truth is, it's all for everybody. It's always there. It's always deep within us. And it's so crucial for us to understand this, especially when we talk about our calling, and vocational calling to ministry. It is a serious thing. And yet God chooses to use people like me, people like you, people like, right? Nobody is perfect for it. And so you get people like Saul, King Saul in the Old Testament, whose insecurity overwhelmed him. And then you get somebody like King David, who probably was insecure, didn't allow that to, because he was the youngest and out there taking care of sheep when Samuel comes in to do the anointing. He probably was insecure, but it didn't define his life. And he pressed in to know God. He was described as a man after God's own heart. And so the difference, I think, to me is clear in that David took everything and he just really tried to know and build that relationship with God. And that's, I think, what I've seen in you. Like, you didn't turn and try to, Saul's trying to kill his enemies and he's trying to, focus on others. One of the remedies for insecurity is just to connect into God even more. Right. And so back into, you're in youth ministry, a youth leader, and then on a trip in 2006,
somewhere there.
2006, it was a pretty important trip to Costa Rica, because there was somebody on that trip that you were destined to meet. Tell us about that.
Right. So we joined two churches going on a same mission trip. The trip of a lifetime. We're going to go to Costa Rica, do this mission trip to teach kids the gospel. I mean, I was so pumped about this. It would be the first time that I was ever really out of the country, and still one of the highlights of my life. But it was a highlight on top of a highlight, because there, in one of our training trips for this thing, I met this girl, and really it was kind of a passing thing. There's this girl named Kristen. She was always dancing and just kind of a wallflower of sorts, while still being incredibly kind, warm. She was serving people and just doing nice things. I liked her. She was friendly, and that was kind of the end of it. At least I thought. We get to this mission trip in Costa Rica and begin to spend a lot more time together. We've got several scenes together because, of course, we're doing dramas. What do you do when you can't speak the language? You do the dramas, and I'm lifting her in the air, and we're just spending time together. And I can hear, the "Why Do Birds Suddenly Appear" song in the background. And I don't know. We just kind of hit it off. The chemistry was there, and we began to talk more seriously, just about everything. And come to find out, she's got this boyfriend who I'm sure was a nice guy, but you would not have known by the way that I talked about him. Just, really, it doesn't sound like a good fit for you.
Man, you got in there and just wiggled your way right in.
It was funny because I think back to this so many times. I don't think I was trying to.
I don't think you were either. Watching you guys on that trip, there was a real connection, and you may not have sensed it right away, but I think everybody else saw the connection was just like immediate, and the way you both just worked so well together, and how you complement each other. And I mean, it took off right away from there, right? In a couple of years you're married, and then a year later you have a kid, right? I mean,
That's right.
It was that quick, wasn't it?
It was really fast. And honestly, Kristen and I look back at that season of our lives and just think, man, how foolish we were to do it the way we did it. The speed of it alone was enough to say, okay, is this the right thing at the right time? Is this the right way to go about it? And I lament so much of my failed leadership in that, because I could have been so much more helpful to her and to myself. We could have included, I just have to think about including you in this much more, and just seeking wisdom and counsel that I would have counseled anybody against the way that I did it. But this is another one of those areas of my life where I look and see all the potential destruction and damage that God just takes it and makes it beautiful,
right?
Redeems it. And
your hearts were both, not to say pure, to be overly, overly whatever, but there was really just an honest desire to, you've met the person you want to spend the rest of your life with. You've met somebody who's a good match for you. You just want to then step into the next era. You want to move forward. And so there was nothing about that was like, I don't know, that wasn't really, that had any, again, I don't want to use the word impure as if it's just an overly simplistic term, but
sure.
I think God protected you in all of that and guided you in that, because there really was just youth and just a desire to begin your life. And Kristen, who I definitely need to have on this podcast to share her own story. You both come from really broken families.
Yeah.
And what is beautiful about marriage is the opportunity to come from brokenness and to come together and create a whole new sense of wholeness. One of the things that I've always said, I'm sure you remember me saying it, but that, finding that person, that spouse, really the goal there is to find somebody who loves God more than I do and who's going to help me love God better, right? That is really the purpose. If they can't do that, if they're going to bring me down, drag me down, if they're going to be a distraction from me and my relationship with God, then they're not going to point me towards wholeness. But when marriage is done right, it really is not about wholeness together so much as about wholeness individually as well as together. And so I think there was just a lot of that desire that the Lord just honored and really kept you guys. So from there, you guys moved to a couple of different churches and got involved in ministry there. So you're working full time at this time, right? Married, then start to have kids. What was so at that point in your life, are you thinking full-time ministry, or are you thinking just I'll do, I don't know, bivocational ministry? Where is ministry on your radar?
Always in the background, always something I'm engaged in. I'm doing it, although to that point, I was not, again, I never actively pursued it. And even to this day, it's always been something that God has handed to me. And I think out of mercy and condescension, like he knows that I need that. I'm just not going to raise my hand and say, hey, I should do the thing. Put me in there, captain. I should be first place. It's one of those things where it's just not my personality. And God has to use kid gloves with me quite a bit. Again, going back to that fear, that insecurity. So in the background, it's there, but God has given me opportunities. He's putting people in my life who are saying, hey, maybe you should teach, and maybe we should have you do this as in a part-time capacity. And my first part-time gig was at this small Baptist church in Bellflower. And they asked me, hey, we need someone like you. Can you step in? And I hemmed and hawed and said, I don't know. Let me think about it. And we'll talk to other people about it. And eventually I said, okay, let's do this. And so I did that on top of doing my full-time role. And that was really my first foray into paid ministry.
Wow.
And that was the joke. It was a part-time gig. And I'm going to use air quotes here. It was part-time ministry, which you only find out later is really part-time pay for full-time ministry. So I had two full-time jobs, but I loved it. And it was so special and sweet. And I love that church so much for giving me the opportunity to do that in a paid capacity. It was life-changing for us.
So when did you know? Like, when did you, and we've had these conversations before, so I think I know, but I mean, when did you know? There is a moment where I feel like for any calling, whether it's, vocational, full-time ministry, or other, whatever the calling is, where you kind of step in and it's like, this is where I was meant to be. This is what I was meant to do. Like, I've had that feeling various times and in various roles. Was it there? Was it way back when because you were doing all that stuff when you were involved in the church with us and and you were involved in the church overall, not just the youth ministry, but you were leading worship, you were youth leader, you were teaching classes, mentoring students, doing small group stuff. When did it feel like there was a sense of like, this really resonates with me? This is what I'm supposed to be doing.
I think I had glimmers of some of that, really like sampler taste of like, this is amazing. I can't believe I'm getting paid to do this. And I don't know if I've ever had the full meal, as it were, to use the analogy further. I've had moments where I feel like, this is awesome. I can't believe I get to do this, man. I want to do this. But there's always in the back of my head that critic that says, but there's maybe someone who could do it better, that the money would be better spent supporting that people and those things. So honestly, I've had moments of this over the past, I don't know, let's just call it the 10 years of my life, where I feel like, okay, I belong here. I'm not an imposter. I had to get over imposter syndrome
Yeah.
over and over again.
Right.
And I feel like there's times where it's clear this is a good spot for me to be. And people are affirming this. Other pastors are telling me that I'm good at this and I could do
Right.
this well. But there's always that unsettled nature of my heart where I'm like, Lord, I'm happy to move if there's someone else who would be better suited for this.
Right.
I never want to get to a place where I feel entitled to the role. And I don't think that's what you're getting at.
Right.
It's been more, it's been a fight for me. I have to fight myself constantly to say, no, I need to do this. I want to. The want's there. It's always that sense of, is there someone better that can do it? And if so, then I better work harder and be smarter and get better at my people skills and my preaching skills and all these other skills so that I can be useful to the Lord. And granted, there's a positive side of that too, where it keeps me sharp, keeps me running hard.
Right.
The negative side to that is this incredible burden of performance, which God never designed for us for.
I was just going to say, it sounds exhausting.
Man, there have been seasons where I'm sure I created my own pit of despondence and depression and anxiety and fear and self-loathing because of these things that I put on myself. Jesus doesn't do this. This is me. So there are other times, conversely, where I found great freedom in saying, man, I am who I am, not like Popeye, but more like Paul, just saying like, this is who I am. And I belong to the Lord. I'm his problem.
Right.
I'm going to serve to the best of my ability and enjoy what I have the privilege of doing. So I feel incredibly honored that I get to do this. But I don't know. I don't think I've come to the point where I would say, and this is forever. I'd like to do this for as long as the Lord will give me. And maybe that is the rest of my life. But there's always someone in the back of my head saying, but if this doesn't work, what's the plan B? And I don't know what that is. I just feel the sense of unsettledness. And I think that's helped keep me sharp, Sandy Jo.
You know, we were just literally this week talking about this very thing. And so I'd like to tie it in. I asked you whether or not you felt like you would go into being like a lead pastor and a senior pastor. And you asked the question, does a person's ability mean that they should? So you have the giftings that you could do it. You have the ability to do it. Doesn't mean that you should do it. And my response was pretty quick, like, yes.
Yes, surprisingly quick.
Because, and I think I really want to dialogue about that a little bit more. For me, it feels like the older I get, the more I realize how short life is, how short our lives really are, and how much we spend time, how much we waste time in things that are not important, or spend time worrying and overthinking, and that's for sure me, doubting and rather than just doing it and pressing in and taking the bull by the horns, so to speak. I think there are a lot of people, all of us struggle with our sense of confidence, our understanding our abilities, knowing what our abilities are, and then stepping confidently into doing that. I believe God has uniquely gifted each and every one of us. And that if we have those abilities and gifts, that absolutely we should do it. We're called to do it. So for you, I mean, I know you literally just moved like 3 or 4 months ago to Texas, and you just started this church plant. And so by no means am I telling you to overthrow the current lead pastor, but this is an area that, for you, as you begin to think and pray about, it will be another probably challenge to get past that, am I really called to do that? Should I really do that? Is there somebody better who could do that? I don't know. Talk about that a little bit.
So one of the things that's stood out to me is God has given me opportunities so frequently in my life. And I've always struggled with, okay, does an opportunity mean a responsibility? Just because I can do it, does that mean I should do it? And I guess I have waffled back and forth on this for years. I remember you and I talked about one of my opportunities and I said, look, should I do this? And you gave me some counsel that has stuck with me for all those years since. And it's, if you make a bad decision, it's not a decision God can't fix.
Right.
You can't put yourself in a situation that God can't say, oh man, you're stuck there now. There goes my plans.
Right.
I got so much comfort from that I said, okay, well, in that case, I'm going to do this. I'd rather live with the disillusionment of having failed rather than the regret of never trying. So we did that. And I still continue to do those things using much of that counsel to feel that sense of, okay, I can do this. And if God doesn't want me there, he'll put me somewhere else.
Right.
But that doesn't give me that sense of, okay, but I can play the guitar. Should I lead worship every week? Well, maybe not. Maybe God doesn't want me to use that set of skills for this particular season of my ministry life.
Right.
Every time I do this, it's always open-handed. And I guess that's part of what kind of influences my philosophy on this. I don't want to force myself upon a situation as though I'm the best fit for the job, because I never really know that.
Sure.
And I want God to make that clear one way or another. And that's why I tend to step back and say, I don't know that ability means responsibility. I'd rather just sit back and say, Lord, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
Make it clear and I'll walk through that door.
Well, and you bring up a great point that and especially, I mean, thinking historically, we're living into the 80s, 90s, 100s, like we haven't in the past. You think about the Middle Ages or the height of, at the beginning of the Reformation and all of that, people are living into their 30s and 40s. So to talk about like first, second, third, fourth career, or all of these talents and abilities that are leading you from, you were working at a pretty good job teaching and training at a secular, meaning not religious organization, right?
Right.
But you went from that into full-time ministry and pursuing education and all of that. Those thoughts about having multiple careers or multiple abilities to do multiple things was not even something we thought about 400 or 500 years ago. And I think so it's and even let's say 100 years ago, we're talking about women weren't necessarily in the workforce as they are today. And men had a single career where they would retire maybe at 50 or whatever it was, right? If they had that type of luxury. We're in a whole new age where we are exploring our gifts and our abilities like never before. And there's not necessarily a precedence for this, but it's kind of a new age of enlightenment or renaissance to, in a way where there's so much opportunity and so many giftings and abilities that it may be for a season. So you were a worship leader for a season, then you were a youth pastor for a season, and now you're an associate pastor for a season. That those seasons may change into something else. Ideally, I think as we grow in our ability and sharpening our strengths and our talents to do something more. And it's not necessarily that our lives move in a linear fashion from one strength and gifting to another. It doesn't work like that. Illness comes in, tragedy comes in, lots of stuff. But ideally, we are growing. And I think, this is what you see Paul talking about in the early church. We're growing in our gifts. We're utilizing our abilities more and more for God's kingdom. And so we may not use all of them at the same time, but that there's growth there for us to use our abilities more maybe than we would have before. Now, one of the conversations that we had, and this probably was maybe 10 years ago, maybe 11. This was right. Why are you smiling?
Because you have such a great memory. I'm just so impressed by it.
No, I mean, I feel like my memory is going. Again, I think 45 is the cutoff for me. So we'll see. I think it's all literally downhill from here.
No way.
But we were talking about full-time ministry, and we were talking about the vocational call and whether or not you were debating this decision. You were still working at ADP, I think, and really had a really good job there, enjoyed what you're doing, training and teaching, because you're a teacher. And the question was, do I step out and go into full-time ministry? And I was cautioning you to think about not doing that. And I don't know if you remember that conversation, but the idea was, well, and there was a lot to it, but encouraging even more of like a bivocational type of ministry. And that is where a lot of some people are going today, not necessarily staying in full-time ministry, but doing more bivocational stuff. But the caution was also to ensure that you didn't get hurt in the process, that churches can have their I think the concern was not wanting to see you get just, I don't know, demolished in a situation that might be hurtful. Churches can really be hard, right? I don't know if I should say that they suck, but they do sometimes, right? Not all, right? The Bill Hybels says the church is the hope of the world, and I believe that. But I don't know. What was that final shift where you said, all right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to quit this job and I'm going to become a junior high. I think it was junior high first, right? I'm going to
Yes, it
quit this
was.
job and I'm going to become a junior high youth pastor.
That's right. I do remember that conversation. I believe we were at the Tustin Marketplace.
Yeah.
And I do recall the caution, and you were not the first one to caution me. Actually, there was multiple people in my ear who said something to the same effect of like, hey, just be careful. Church ministry is hard, and jumping into it like this without having any fallback position, a
Right.
bivocational position, it really puts you in a very vulnerable place. So the reality is I didn't have an opportunity for that. Church wasn't offering, hey, you could do this part-time and then do the other part-time,
Right.
go somewhere else. It was like, hey,
Right.
we have a job for you. We want you to do this full-time. We want all of you and the best of you.
Right.
So the fact that God didn't give me that opportunity to choose that really just, it made me say, okay, I have to make a decision, and
Yeah.
it's either going to be a great one
Right.
or a bad one. And honestly, to the point that you made, man, I had to take some serious knocks going through that season. There were times when I had closed the door in my office and I was basically, I mean, not even basically, I was literally crying to the Lord saying, Lord, am I supposed to be here? Do you want me here? If I should not be here, please get me out.
Yeah.
If I'm not fit for this, if I'm not the guy, please, my heart, Lord, I don't want to be here if you don't want me here. And it wasn't that there was any one thing. It was just a multiplicity of things. It was the expectations and the lack of response, and just it's just hard. And it was so much. I mean, I'm part of a church that likes to do a lot, and it's a lot of good things. And if one's not careful, you can easily build this mentality of busyness.
Yes.
And the busyness becomes this incredible burden that it's a slave driver that never lets you breathe or even realize what it is that you're doing. So the habits of silence and solitude and the discipline of just prayerful reflection kind of quickly just move their way off into the periphery at best.
Wow.
So I really struggled, and God had to, severely humble me. And it was through the life of the church. And to your point, man, the church is full of people, and people are challenging. We're people, so we understand that.
Right.
I've learned that sheep do bite. They're not great at a lot of things. Sheep are really vulnerable, but they bite.
Yes.
And I remember one kid, Sandy Jo, let me tell you this, one kid, thankfully only one so far, hopefully never again. One kid that I had started telling people, I mean, not people, at least one leader, at least maybe two, was telling people that I was a pedophile.
Are you serious?
Not even joking. Not even.
That
this kid did not like me.
That's so bad.
Huge, right? This guy could have ruined my life.
Absolutely.
By saying something like that. Thankfully, the leader was able to talk some sense into him and stop him from doing stuff like that. But it was he was just another pebble on like the back of the camel or whatever, the straw, where I'm just like, oh Lord, this is, how do I survive? And thankfully, God got me through that season. I mean, not without a lot of heartache and difficulty and turmoil, but God got me through that season and helped me really come to grips with, okay, the church is dangerous because people are dangerous. And yet I'm still called to be vulnerable. I'm still called to have a tender heart, even as I try to maintain thick skin.
Well, and Rod, I think what is so powerful, and I think, and I know you've toyed with the idea of even teaching, like becoming a college professor, because you really have a passion to teach. And I think this is where the fluidity of our calling, and again, especially today, I think it's becoming more rare for a person to stay in one church, one position, forever. And it's not because God changes or anything like that, but I think it's just we're living in different times, and we are being able to use our talents and gifts in more ways than we would have had the opportunity in previous times. And so there may be you would be an awesome college professor. I could absolutely see that. But I also could see you, and I could see you doing both, of course. But I think for you, full-time ministry is something that I don't think I worry about for you anymore. I think you can easily, I mean, not easily because it's tough, but I think you could navigate this because this is what you're called to do, whether it's ministry in a college setting, again, as a professor, or both. I think that this is what you are truly called to do. And it's um and it's not like I couldn't see it before. I think what I was worried about before was, again, just the getting into a church setting where, you got a position at a church, but yeah, there's no backup anywhere else, or if it's not, connected to a denomination, or there's networks where you can go elsewhere and all that kind of stuff. And I think it was more particular to just kind of that, and even, giving up that full-time job, a good job, and going into ministry. But you have been, and I've seen others do it and then go back to their jobs, but you have been prepared, and being prepared from a young age for this. And what I saw even way back, when you were younger, is that you had such a heart for God, and such a concern for others, and such strong leadership abilities. And I think you just loved ministry in so many different ways. And so it's wonderful to see it on the other side of it, and seeing it played out, and for you to have the courage to step in to that role, and to let go of other things, and to stick with it when people are calling you not so nice things, especially, really, really bad things that could put you in prison. I mean, that's really powerful. And then here you are with taking another huge leap of faith to leave family and friends, and to move to the middle of the country. I mean, what was that process, that journey to get you to this place to take this position?
God has historically dealt with me in one of two ways. One, he gives me a voracious desire to do something, and I'm like, I'm going to do that. I got to do that. Most often, though, and most predictably, again, because of my temperament, my personality, he has to put me in a position where it's like I kind of have to move. I have to do something because he's pushing me out of the nest. And so I love my last home. I loved where we were at. I loved our church. I loved where we were in the country. I mean, beautiful weather and beaches and mountains and everything that we could possibly desire. There's no way I'm going to leave that willingly.
Right.
So God puts me in this position where I have to make a decision what the next phase of my ministry life is going to look like. And I thank God for that, because it put me in the position to examine everything and say, okay, what am I looking at? What am I doing? What makes sense? Where am I gifted? Where can I make the biggest impact for the kingdom? And I don't think if I were put in that position, I don't think I would have spent time thinking much about that, because I was so comfortable.
Right.
So God gives me this position to say, okay, well, you can't stay in your current role. There's going to be a transition. You have to make a decision. You can go to other churches. You can apply to work at these other churches that are known by our church. And I just began to lay down the options. And one of the options was to plant a church with one of my friends from my old church. And one of the fellow pastors brought it up to him and said, hey man, what do you think about me coming with you? He's the one who's leading this church, and we're friends. And he responded very positively to that. So when he responded that way, I brought it to Kristen and I said, sweetheart, what do you think about this? We're talking about next phase of our life and ministry. What if we move to Texas? And that began a series of, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 months of prayer and counsel seeking, where you're talking to different people about what they thought about it. And again, we came to this conclusion of we're given no guarantees. We have no idea what this is going to be, but we'd rather suffer the loss of having tried and failed than suffer the delusionment of simply just staying and letting the default select us. I didn't want that. I wanted us to pick something that we felt like, oh, we're going to do this. We're going to exercise some faith. And it was a much bigger deal because now my kids are older. I have a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. They had some serious friendships where we're at. And I really, really weighed that heavily before I pulled the trigger. But I thought, no, this is good for all of us.
Wow.
We're all going to be uncomfortable. We're all going to have to suffer and adjust. And I thought that's great for them. They're going to learn early on that life is really best lived just outside the realm of your comfort zone. That's how God's going to most effectively use us most often. Wow. So here we are. We're 4 months into it now, I think. And we love it. We're learning to adapt to the weather and to the culture and to all sorts of things. And we still don't even know because we haven't been here a full year yet. We don't know what the winter's going to be like, which is going to be very different, I hear. We're just, we're learning and we're adapting. And granted, I do see some troublesome signs in my family. I mean, some of the tumult has caused some frustration and short tempers and impatience. Right. But I also see lots of good things. Being part of a church plant makes us scrappy and resourceful and lean and mean. There's so many positives to it that I thank God for. And I fully expect that in the next 5 years, God's going to show us great growth. Personally, I trust, and that much I do know. Whether it's corporately in our church, I don't know. I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, but I don't hold God to anything because he's God. He can do what he wants. But I do know and am fully convinced we will grow in love for him and in love for others. And ultimately, that's what I want.
Yeah, I love that, Rod. And I think all of your life has positioned you to be able to make these decisions, and you weighed them out, and you're a very thoughtful, intentional person, and weighing all of these options, but yet your life has prepared you then to be able to make this huge move and take a risk and a leap of faith and be willing to step out into something that is definitely going to stretch you, your family, your kids. There are going to be struggles that they're going to face, and new schools and just a whole new culture, a whole new climate, right? But the difference between how you had to kind of survive and struggle through childhood and all the tumult and lack of a strong foundation there, that's not the same as what they're experiencing. Like, they've had that good foundation, that care and nurture. And so what they are going to experience is a type of healthy growth, I think, right? Where it's time to branch out and not, as you said, stay in your comfort zone. And they're going to experience that for their own life, and maybe be willing to step out and do courageous things in their own life for God, because they see that you're living that as well. Rod, it is always such a pleasure to talk to you. Your insight, your wisdom, your heart for God, for people. You are truly unique in just who you are and your ability and capabilities. And I love what you're doing. I love seeing not only the growth, but you truly are extraordinary. And there are so many things that are yet to happen. You finished your master's degree. You're now looking at, you got your bachelor's degree. It was in leadership at Biola.
That's right.
And then master's degree in
Christian ministry. And then are now looking at potentially a DMin, maybe in biblical counseling, which would be fantastic. And so it's just exciting to see where you've been and where you're going, and appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. Sandy Jo, thank you so much for not only having me on your podcast, but, and I've told you before, and I'm going to put it on the air now so that you don't forget it. You are, you're definitely, if not the most influential person in my life. You are one of the most, and your love and your care for me during those crazy years that I lived has left an imprint on me that I still can't shake. In fact, one of the things that you said earlier in the podcast, I've almost repeated verbatim to my students and my kids. And it's funny because there's so many things about the way that you taught me and the things that, I mean, our early morning prayers together back when we were in Cerritos.
Right.
I mean, picking me up for coffee and just taking me under your wing. I am so thankful for your love in my life, Sandy Jo. I would not be the man I am
Wow.
apart from your investment. So thank you so much for being willing to be used by God in this guy's life. I'm deeply humbled and thankful for your life.
Thank you so much, Rod. That means the world to me. And really what that also means is that I am to blame for all of your, if you go awry in your ministry,
That's exactly what I'm getting at.
They'll know who to come and
who to blame.
Who to blame. Well, Rod, thanks again. Try to stay cool in that Texas heat, and I would love to bring you back on, and at some point, especially as you get into the church planting stuff and kind of share how things are going. What's the name of your church for anybody who's in Texas, and for anybody who wants to come and check it out?
Oh, thanks so much. Compass Bible Church. We're meeting currently in Frisco at Founders Classical Academy on Sundays at a morning hour. 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock, I'm pretty sure. Please check our website. I get there so early, I don't even know. I get there early. I'm there. I don't even know what time.
It all rolls into the next part, right?
Yes, exactly. But it was a pleasure to be on the podcast. Yes, compassntx.org. NTX is in North Texas.
North Texas, NTX.org. compassntx.org. So if you're in that area and you want to go check out their church and see what God might be leading you to do or be involved, that would be awesome. All right. Well, this has been another episode of our Nephesh Podcast, episode 56, and really, truly a thrill and an honor to have Rod Gomez come on and share his story and his journey and his calling to ministry, and now in leading him, that has led him to North Texas and doing ministry there. And so we're grateful for that, and we will talk to you next time.